Hey guys! So, in this video we are going to talk about democracy, or more specifically we're going to talk about making decisions in a flat company structure. So let's get into it. Now, the other day a subscriber of mine reached out and asked what my thoughts are on making decisions within a development team, basically. And since I kind of have an interesting perspective to share on this, I thought I'll push it one further and talk a little bit about company structure in general. Now, for those of you out there who may be a bit more junior, you may have this idea, and to a degree it's actually very true in certain companies. It's still, in general, you'll find that you have two types of company structure. You have the traditional hierarchy, where you have the boss at the top and everything cascades. It's a pyramid, basically. And the idea of a flat company structure is that everybody's equal. Regardless of who you are within the company, everybody's equal. You can take this to the extreme, of course, like the founders are equal to the managers, and the operations people are equal to the developers. You can go as far as you want. Every company makes their own rules. And that's just a good rule to have with you in general. When anybody's telling you something, guys, always remember, the company still makes their own rules. Everybody has their own definition of what something means. Try to find someone in the programming world that can define what restful means, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Anywho, so when you have a so-called flat structure, there's pros and cons to this, because the idea with the flat structure is that everybody has an equal say. Now, I'll explain how things were working at my company for a little while, where the founders had the idea that they wanted to run their company as a family. Now, this is extremely common in startups, and the reason why this is very common in the startup world is because when you have a very small company who has kind of gone out on a limb, it's vital that each individual in the company fits very well into that environment, because you need people who truly care in order to make it as a startup. You can't have people who are just in it for the money, or rather you don't want too many of those, because you need people who innovate, you need people who go the extra mile. And so the idea was to build this type of family feel. Some companies have this strategy right. Now, their idea of this was to have each department head or each department have an equal say in how we structure the backlog. In other words, what work is going to be done, how are we going to implement features, etc., etc. And what we found very quickly was that this was absolutely horrible for the company. Why? Well, I spoke to one of the founders about this, and I explained that from my perspective, the issue here is that at the end of the day, I'm very flattered that they are asking me for my opinion, but I'm not so naive as to believe that I have a deep understanding of what's right for the company. Just think about it. My primary function at my company is to write software, to know everything there is to know about the code base, how to build things, how the system works. I have never been in a business meeting. I'm not the person in all the who travels around the world and meets all of our customers and our business partners and go to meetings with fancy people in suits. I'm not that guy. So I have no idea what the needs of our stakeholders are. I don't know what our budget is. I don't know anything apart from the things that I work with on a daily basis. So if you want me to have an equal say in decisions that are meant to be beneficial for the company and drive the company forward, that's actually a really bad idea, because I don't know. I can give you my perspective, but that's not necessarily the best perspective. So I explained, the best thing for you is to think of it as a conciliary type of situation, where you as the manager or one of the founders, you have a direction, you have a vision, and you listen to the people in your company. That doesn't mean that everybody has exactly an equal say in everything, because you can't have that, because then you lack leadership. You're not moving anywhere. You're just trying to somehow figure out how all these people who have different perspectives, these different perspectives are great, but if they have an equal say, you're not going to move anywhere. Because you will sooner or later get to a stalemate. And this is true in software development as well, in programming. So let's talk about that, because the fundamental question my subscriber asked was, how do we compare decision-making processes when it comes to deciding as a team what to do, as opposed of deciding, having the decision being made by a tech lead, basically. And for the juniors out there, a tech lead or a team lead is basically just a person, like it's your closest manager. As a programmer, most likely it's going to be your closest manager. It's a person with ideally a little bit more experience, who manages the team, manages all your stories, and basically helps you out with daily tasks. Now, ideally, what you want is to have a democracy type of situation where you and your coworkers, and in my experience, this kind of works almost 90% of the time. Because guys, programmers are on average, at least from my experience, rational, logical people. They get emotional about some things, but for the most part, if you have the approach, like usually I find that when you have a disagreement when it comes to programming, it's very rare that the issue can't be resolved by simply talking. Me and my coworkers, whenever we have a technical discussion about something, we're going to implement something, what we do is that we sit down as a team and we talk about the implementation, we talk about the considerations from our different perspectives, we have an open dialogue about our thoughts about how to solve the problem. And by just talking, we usually come up with a few alternatives as to how we're going to solve that problem. And after talking about the different alternatives, it very quickly becomes a discussion about, all right, this would be nice, but we have a time restriction. And you start by first talking about the technical limitations and specifications, and then you start talking about, okay, this would be the best scenario, but we don't have time. It's higher risk, like we have other considerations because we have stakeholders, we have deadlines, all that stuff. By just talking about it, we almost always come to an agreement on how to do something. The only time we don't do this, the only time we never get to an agreement, doesn't actually happen so often at the technical decision level. Usually the implementation decision comes very naturally by just talking, but it is much trickier sometimes to agree on, and this is the silliest little thing in the whole goddamn world, coding styles. Should you use curly braces? Should you use curly braces on the same line or the line under? Should you use double quotes or single quotes? That sort of thing. And what's interesting about this is like the only time, well, not the only time, but for the most part, this is the only time where our tech lead actually gets to have final say on something. And what we do is very simple. If we have a technical decision that cannot be resolved within the team, which, as I said, is very rare, we document it. We voice our opinions, and then we all agree as a joint force that our tech lead should have the final say, and then we will document the thing in our documentation tool and sign off on it. What we call basically disagree and commit. And the idea is that you should be grown up enough, if you will. You have to be the sort of person who can go in and say, this is my opinion, this is how I feel about it, these are the reason I feel this way, and if you don't agree, I don't agree with you, but I will accept the outcome of the situation. Because what's important here is that there is no way you will always agree with everybody around you. But in order for the company to be able to keep on moving forward, we cannot have segregation in the ranks. You have to be behind the decision. And if you're not behind the decision, the tech lead needs to talk to you, or we need to reevaluate until you are behind the decision. Because what you don't want is to have three people who all agree sort of, and move in the same, who are pulling in the same direction, working as a team, and one person who's secretly bitter and in silence is sabotaging the project. That's the thing you want to avoid, and that's why we call it disagree and commit. You have to be able to do that. So, to summarize, guys, on average, having a democracy with a flat structure works very well for just the overall happiness of the company and so forth. But you have to have leaders. These leaders need to listen to everybody around them and take their considerations seriously, or their thoughts seriously. But you cannot have an absolute democracy in a company, because at the end of the day, somebody has to pick a direction. Because some of the times, you find that you're actually in a situation where there's no right or wrong answer, but more than one option is completely viable. And then you just have to pick something. And that's where a leader comes in. You have to have people who have the ability to just make a decision. Doesn't matter if it's the best thing. It just has to move you somewhere. Have a great day.